ladies and gentlemen, it is my greatest honor to stand before you this morning on this auspicious occasion of the Inaugural Gauteng Investment Conference. This conference was officially launched at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange in February 2025. With this conference, the Gauteng provincial government aims to catalyze the province's economic momentum and align with its broader regional integration goals in an effort to ramp up and to promote Gauteng as a leading global investment and tourism destination. As the nerve center of the regional economy, Gauteng province is positioned as the anchor of investments in South Africa and the African continent broadly. Gauteng contributes 33.2% of the gross domestic product nationally and is also the largest provincial economy within the Southern African Development Community. Over the past 2 months, the Gauteng provincial government has been engaging various sectors that are critical to the economy, aligning their programs and innovations with the key priorities of the provincial government, the national government, and the regional development community in the African continent. The vision for the development of these sectors is contained in the sector plans strategy that was developed and adopted by the Gauteng province in 2024. These plans aim to improve insights into the performance challenges and opportunities within the various sectors. They serve as a guiding tool for the Gauteng provincial government to advance the development of specific sectors and achieve small, medium, and micro enterprise development, transformation, and industrialization. This is anchored on our economic development plan, which itself is anchored on skills development as an overarching priority. The Gauteng provincial government is working with various private sector and civil society sector stakeholders to provide various skills development programs, including business incubation, entrepreneurship training, and sector-specific skills programs, with initiatives like the Gauteng Enterprise Propel and the Township Enterprise Hubs, as well as training in high-priority sectors. It is important that I briefly outline the sectors for which we have developed a draft comprehensive plan. The first being manufacturing. Herein we are referring to light, heavy, and advanced manufacturing, which includes capital equipment. Manufacturing aligns with our priority of reindustrialization through increasing productivity, adopting technology, and supporting SMMEs within the subsectors of aerospace and defense, automotive, chemicals, furniture, clothing, textile, leather, and footwear. The second sector for which we have comprehensive plans is construction, wherein our aim is to modernize construction capabilities, enhance infrastructure development, and drive economic growth. Global business services and information communication and technology constitutes another sector for the province. The objective herein is to establish Gauteng as a leading destination for GBS and to promote digital transformation, innovation hubs, and skills training. In the finance sector, our goal is to enhance financial services, increase access to funding for businesses, and to promote investment. Another key sector for us is transport and logistics, where our priority is to improve transport infrastructure, optimizing logistics, and supporting e-commerce to boost economic growth and streamline supply chains. For the cultural and creative industry sector, we aim to drive economic growth by nurturing local talent, promoting tourism, and encouraging creative entrepreneurship. And finally, we have developed a comprehensive plan for the green economy sector with the aim of achieving sustainable growth through investments in renewable energy, the promotion of resource efficiency, and the reduction of negative environmental impact. The sector plans are in alignment with the Gauteng provincial government's Growing Gauteng Together program, referred to as the GGT 2030. The public sector project pipeline showcased at this Gauteng Investment Conference reflect a bold and coordinated investment strategy aimed at catalyzing inclusive economic growth and job creation. A total of 117 public sector-led projects have been identified, representing a cumulative investment value of 239.1 billion. These strategic initiatives span key sectors such as infrastructure, energy, logistics, digital technology, housing, and manufacturing. Together, they are expected to generate over 852,000 jobs, significantly boosting livelihoods across the province. This pipeline underscores the Gauteng provincial government's commitment to leveraging public investment as a catalyst for private sector participation while driving long-term transformation and positioning Gauteng as a high-impact investment destination on the African continent.
This is clearly evidence that Ford fully supports the key pillars of the SARM 2035 master plan and remains committed to South Africa's long-term growth and sustainability. The success of TASIS underscores the importance of expanding similar public-private partnerships to further develop South Africa's industrial capacity and global competitiveness. We remain committed to identifying and advancing opportunities that drive this game-changing development forward. However, it is also vital that we also acknowledge the challenges that we as a manufacturer and as an industry continue to face that are not evident in other locations across the globe against which we compete. These are pain points that we need to be cognizant of and have to address together if South Africa is to remain globally competitive and continue to attract investment. Firstly, logistics, and this is both road and rail. The South African automotive sector faces severe logistic bottlenecks, including inefficiencies at port, unreliable rail infrastructure, and increasing road congestions, with a tariff structure higher than anywhere else in the world for rail. Disruptions in logistics increase costs, delay exports, and impact on the industry's global competitiveness. In line with SARM 2035, the goal for South Africa is to produce 1% of global production. South Africa exports a significant portion of its locally produced vehicles to major markets. Efficient logistics, I should say, are essential to maintaining the country's position as a competitive automotive export hub. As a sector, we rely on just-in-time manufacturing and making seamless logistics a non-negotiable as part of this requirement. Prolonged inefficiencies in transport networks result in manufacturers having to consider alternative production hubs, especially where costs associated with moving both finished goods and components is at far more competitive rates. As a sector, we are actively engaging with government and stakeholders to modernize our logistics infrastructure. Progress has been made. However, there is still some way to go to be globally competitive. Private-public partnerships are key to improving port efficiency, strengthening rail networks, and addressing policy bottlenecks. Addressing these issues is critical to sustaining jobs, boosting GDP, and ensuring long-term industrial growth. The second pain point is to talk about stable electricity supply. Whilst we have seen improvements in the level and the extent of load shedding impacting our country, we have implemented, like other companies, plans to reduce our dependence on the national grid for electricity, including the installation of solar carports that generate approximately 35% of our daytime power from solar. This action comes at great expense, and in order to maintain the competitiveness at a global level, these costs cannot be passed on to our customer markets and have to be absorbed in our local operating costs. The additional point to consider is that many of our suppliers are heavily impacted by load shedding, and these smaller companies are simply not in a position to invest the millions in alternative energy sources, which seriously impacts their production capacity, and ultimately the delivery of parts to our assembly production lines. Thirdly, the importance of stability. Stability in South Africa is crucial for sustainable growth. Attracting investment and maintaining global competitiveness, which is represented by our ability to meet our commitments to supply our export customer demands on time and at a competitive costs. The global automotive manufacturers seek stable environments when deciding on new investments or expansion. Stability reassures multinational companies, like Ford, that South Africa is a reliable production hub.
Gauteng in particular is a leading hub and a gateway for a market of 1 billion people in Africa. This opportunity can only be fully leveraged by building internal resilience. The challenge is put to the Gauteng government to improve operational efficiency across industrial zones and simplify regulatory compliance, utilizing institutions like Invest as a one-stop shop. We need to work together in an all-of-government approach to leverage financial instruments to mitigate risks brought on by changing tariff structures. Our role in this regard must be to help companies to enhance their competitiveness. Ladies and gentlemen, partnerships for mutual benefit are certainly under threat from unilateral tariff measures. Therefore, South Africa will not be left wanting in this trade tussle. We are actively working towards new opportunities and new markets for our goods and services and working with partners to see the value of mutually beneficial partnerships. We recently returned from a trip in Japan, which was led by our Deputy President together with a team of ministers. I'm happy to report that we secured in Japan a willing and respectful partner. We'll be expanding our partnership to include some of the sectors I mentioned earlier, including green hydrogen and battery technologies for new energy vehicles, amongst others. In addition, we recently hosted a highly successful South Africa-EU summit where a commitment of renewed investment into South Africa was made. As you would recall, an announcement was made of close to 100 billion rands worth of investments in South Africa. Our work program with the European Union will now have a clean trade and investment partnership at the center to organize our efforts to drive lower carbon industrialization. Ultimately, the point is that we're not sitting back and waiting to be affected by what is happening around us. We're actively engaged in a process of making South Africa work and leaving no one behind. As the DTIC, we encourage the private sector and the province to take advantage of these doors that are being opened by national government. Allow me to also indicate that over the next month, we will be engaged in investment drives in both Paris, led by the Deputy President, and in the Gulf region, leveraging commitments that have been made by the UAE and Saudi Arabia in particular, but also including Qatar. Ladies and gentlemen, data has proven that potential for MSMEs to expand the economy and create jobs is invaluable. In addition, as Gauteng, you are the location for leading research institutions in our country, as well as a deep financial sector. Thus, supporting emerging business and financing innovation should also be at the center and at the heart of your investment strategy. This requires the appropriate linkages with providers of capital, partnerships across public and private sector, including leveraging the capabilities of our venture capital markets. In order to succeed in this effort, we cannot simply use the tools of the past, but build an ecosystem that allows for more innovative methods to support MSME growth. This is a critical part of our resilience. MEC and colleagues, in conclusion, as the DTIC, we commend the Gauteng Provincial Government and the Department of Economic Development in particular for organizing this investment conference, and we agree that indeed Gauteng is open for business.
How can the province enhance inward investment? What needs to be done?
Adrian, nothing that hasn't been talked about already. So going back to the input that we've already received from the esteemed minister, the MEC, and including your own scene setting comments, it's important that we continue incentivizing investment through special dispensations such as the SEZs that we have and that we are already, as indicated by the MEC Maile, investing quite a lot in. I would dare to say, consider tax breaks as an opportunity for investors that would attract a lot of investments. I love the work that our investment promotion agencies are already doing, very focused marketing, which we now need even more than we thought we did a couple of years ago under the current circumstances.
Are there specific examples that you could speak to give us, just some sense of this is what's been done, or perhaps an example of what might be done?
So in partnership with the GGDA, for example, the BRICS Business Council hosted a delegation from the Shandong province in China last year, and this enabled business-to-business engagements on opportunities that are available here for from investors who are hungry for opportunity and who also realize that you referred to the demographic dividend. The sub-Saharan population has 40% representation of people under the age of 15. So this is where the workforce of the world is going to come from. And if you look at the input that was given by Neil, for example, that companies compete specifically globally within their own multinational structures for opportunities. I think this bodes very well for our population to actually attract investment to here. So I like that. I like the fact that the Gauteng province had such a formidable representation campaigning at the World Economic Forum for inward investment. So those would be my examples.
Sakiba, could come to you. The ambition here in our as part of this conference is that Gauteng positions itself as the gateway to Africa. There's a geographic awkwardness in that, if I could make the obvious observation. You have to come down to go up. So unfortunately, that's where fate puts us, right at the tip of the continent. What needs to be done to affirm or reaffirm that positioning?
So a couple of things. We were doing some modeling with the colleagues at GGDA, and we said one of the nice numbers maybe to target as a country is that we want to reach $1 trillion economy. At the current rate, it would take us forever rate of growth to get there. But if our economy grew by 10% per annum, we could achieve that in 7.5 years. People may say 10% seems too high. There's a time where the Chinese economy grew on average at between 8+%. The Indian economy currently grows at about 8%, and there are 5 trillion rands. So it is possible. So we're saying we've got to challenge ourselves on what it is that we can do. I'm seeing Bumi here, and one of the things we're talking about, and it will probably be in the logistics panel, is the fact that air traffic now has passenger and cargo, but you're starting to have, let's say, pharmaceutical car companies who are looking at air freight as a possibility because it gets goods into places that they need to fairly quickly. So what we then chose we're going to do, which is basically what this conference is really about, is to demonstrate what is happening in the economy on these investments. I mean, we have one entity here that's a data center. They pledged about 2-3 billion a couple of years ago that they were going to invest. It happened. But for that to happen, they needed to have site development plans approved by municipalities. They needed ESCOM at a time where we didn't have energy supply that was secured. They needed ESCOM to commit what they can do because they need more than 90%, 99% actually availability to their customers. So that's one example. We have Heineken that's putting up a factory in Heidelberg. This is a malt factory, which is one of the ingredients they need for beer. They were importing more than 20,000 containers of malt and barley. Now that is going to be sourced from farmers in South Africa. So it's not just money that, as you say, goes into gross fixed capital formation, but you now have downstream that's going to happen. So the malt and the barley needs to be moved by logistics to where it needs to be, but you now have farmers who have, outside of AB InBev, a new client that is in the market. So that's really what we are doing. I mean, one last example, a factory called Afrozonke, they want to establish in Heidelberg about a 2 billion rands plant, which is actually also going to do import substitution. There's a lot of stuff like jig and many other chemicals we import. Once that factory is up, we are now no longer going to import, they will be done here. But that needed about 75 million rands of government's investment in infrastructure, which is bulk. So many of these, I mean, there's Century, Attack, and property companies that are saying what they're going to invest in the economy. A lot of it relies on bulk infrastructure. So the province has taken a view. We will collaborate with municipalities, we'll collaborate with national, but we need all of them to show us what their pipeline is, what is it that they're investing and how it impacts on the economy. I mean, we know Transnet, and this is what the Revenue Services was saying, that with Transnet's logistics inefficient, it costs the economy about 2-3% in economic growth. That is not happening as a result of that. So really that for us is where the focus is. Everybody knows what it is that is being invested in the economy. We resolve what are the problems, and there are very specific projects. I mean, I can go on, and I thought let me just use a few as practical examples of what we're doing and why then, as you said, with our average incomes, we're still the biggest market for anyone who wants to buy. I mean, almost 16 million people of our population of just about 60 live in Gauteng.
Lizeka, let me come to you. One of the key elements of attracting investment is you need to be able to offer something that differentiates. This is a fierce competition. You're competing against 200 plus countries who have very sharp blades. Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana, Botswana is making increasing noise about attracting capital. Namibia, Mauritius. What's the magic sauce that gets investors to sit up, and does Gauteng have that?
Thank you, Prof. Adrian. I think a lot has been said. Most of the speakers spoke about, I think just the last speaker, Saki, spoke about bragging rights. We remain the province that has well-established infrastructure. We've got road networks, rail systems, as well as the airports that facilitates the free movement of goods and people, which is quite essential for us to be quite efficient to run operations. And I think the issue of skills, it's something that perhaps we do not elevate enough, but we have skilled workforce. Someone was saying earlier on that we remain a province that attracts the young population. We all know Africa is the last economic frontier. So we remain that attraction. But as Harif itself, which is a leading infrastructure investor in the African continent, we have actually invested in those investments that talks to the development of skills. If you look at Traction, which is a private rail services and solutions provider, we've got a plant in Roslyn that refurbish locomotives, not only for ourselves, but for Transnet, for the private operators. And there lies the technical skills that generally you're not going to find outside SA. Yes, we have to be mindful and not be, we have to be mindful of the lurking threats. You've mentioned Kenya, you've mentioned Nigeria. However, I still think our financial sector, we've seen how it was important to what was nascent at the time of establishing the renewable energy, how we collaborated to actually set up today what is well-recognized PPP model.
Incredibly sophisticated framework.
Exactly. Yeah. And that facilitates the development of the water sector, which we all know that is the backbone of achieving all these plans we committed to. I think the fact that, and I support the ambitions of continuously becoming the significant contributor in terms of the GDP as the province, that is possible. Public-private partnership is the go-to. Harris just returned the SADC headquarters in Botswana. From a 15-year concession, we've actually showcased that PPP does actually work, and this is just one example.
If we look at the ambition here, what is business up to that is involved in delivering into this ambition?
No, thank you. Look, first we must congratulate the investment conference. I think as Gauteng, actually, it sends a very bold message to the country. Even though it may seem like it's a provincial conference, it's actually firmly setting up business for a stake in the ground. So if we talk about what the MEC referred to and our colleagues mentioned earlier, the role of the private sector in leading this economy on the back of public investment, it effectively means that you also need a business community that comes along with you. Because you set up these ambitions that you want to build confidence, you want to draw up to $1 billion, close to $1 billion in investments. You need an audience that responds to that. And it's a multi-year plan which should not end here, but ultimately the tangibles that come out of here should be linked to that. So our view is that as organized business, some of these projects need to actually be aligned properly about how does organized business view these kinds of commitments. Are we able to use organized business as a sounding board to ensure that the policies that are put in place are indeed what we need? Are we able to pick up the problems quick enough and have agencies that are responsive thereto? And how do you do that? You take advantage by the fact that not only do you have the largest concentration of economic activity in Gauteng, but you also have the largest concentration of organized business formations in Gauteng, the highest concentration of multinationals in Gauteng. So organized business as it sits in Gauteng is actually a resource for this government. But with this investment conference, we need to transition organized business just being a consultative partner and being a strategic partner with clear measurables like we set up in Operation Vulindlela.
I mean, let's talk about this. Let's talk about where we are in supporting the rollout of infrastructure from your perspective. We had the wave of investment in 2010, and now we find ourselves looking to significantly accelerate this at a time when the world is becoming a lot more complex. We saw with President Donald Trump and his announcements of tariffs in South Africa wasn't spared. The world is becoming more complex. What do we need from an entity like Infrastructure SA to really drive that acceleration?
Thank you very much, Sam. So maybe let me start off by saying a little bit about what Infrastructure South Africa is and its mandate and what we do on a daily basis. We've been established as a national infrastructure coordinating agency that seeks to close the infrastructure investment gap. And we do so by developing a pipeline of bankable infrastructure projects of course, working with the project sponsors. We facilitate the sourcing of sustainable financing and funding solutions for those projects. And we also provide implementation support and technical support in the implementation of those infrastructure projects. The reason why that is critical is that we know that in terms of the National Development Plan, we know that in terms of the National Infrastructure Development Plan of 2050, that the greatest risk that we are facing at the moment to get projects off the ground is that we don't pay sufficient time, energy, and effort into project development or project preparation and bringing these business cases to a bankability phase. So investors, institutional funders, and everybody else that's looking into this space, they really are looking to invest in bankable infrastructure projects. And so from an Infrastructure South Africa perspective, we pay, our mandate is to ensure that these projects are well prepared, they are properly de-risked, and they are ready for financial decisions to be made in that regard. And so the preparation and packaging of infrastructure projects is at the key, is at the heart of unlocking additional funding and financing that we're so desperate for in terms of unlocking infrastructure investment. The MEC Maile last week or 2 weeks back in some G20 sideline event, he mentioned that just Gauteng alone has got an infrastructure investment gap of 1 trillion. How do you get to that space? How do you close that infrastructure investment gap? One of the ways of doing that is to make sure that the project pipeline that we are preparing is geared towards leveraging private sector financing. So PPPs, you've talked about the Gautrain as a great example of that. Projects that are blended finance candidate projects, projects that can be commercially viable, even if they are social infrastructure projects and so on, they have to demonstrate some level of capacity to leverage one way or the other, or to unlock innovative financing mechanisms in relation to those projects. And so from an Infrastructure South Africa perspective, our project pipeline that we are supporting from a project preparation perspective are looking into these network industries, energy, water and sanitation, ICTs. Somebody was talking about digital connectivity just in the previous panel, as well as freight and transportation networks. And they are very key for us because you want to be able to raise aggregate demand in the economy. You want to be able to bring in the private sector participation from a financing as well as an implementation capacity perspective. And so our own project pipeline is looking at those network industries and really supporting projects that are PPPs, projects that are blended finance, candidate projects, projects that can be commercially viable. And if there are social infrastructure projects like health and education, those will be projects that we're looking at that can bring in private sector financing. Because the fiscus is constrained, we all know that. And the Minister of Finance and his team are at pains to explain to us that unless this country's economy is growing at least 5%, there is just no space in the fiscus to accommodate additional investments, infrastructure investment, and the funding that is required. And so the only mechanism of unlocking that infrastructure or tapping into the liquidity that's available for infrastructure investment is to make sure that these projects are well prepared, they are properly de-risked, and they are ready for investment decisions. And that's the space that Infrastructure South Africa plays in. Thanks, Sam.
Let's talk financing briefly, because I want to talk about trends in financing. I mean, we've seen the gap, we've seen the statistics that have been put out today, and of course the desire and the absolute necessity to get to get Gauteng's investment up to around 25% of GDP. Pakama, I would like to sort of reach out to you and let's talk about innovative financing models. Let's talk about financing for innovation, because I think that to differentiate the two, we have Gauteng's role as a potential hub in the critical minerals space. We have it in the advanced manufacturing space. We need to sort of continue to drive that innovation. And so, firstly, what sort of financing do you think about when you talk about financing for innovation? And then perhaps as a second question, what sort of innovative finance do you think holds potential for the province?
Thanks, Sam. So I guess where infrastructure is concerned, and if we were to talk about innovation, and particularly from a debt provision perspective, we can talk about the fact that commercial lenders have funded for many, many years infrastructure projects. So we have ways to look at bespoke and innovative solutions, taking into consideration infrastructure. Obviously, infrastructure has a very, I think, or distinct life cycle. You've got your construction and planning phase. You've got then where a ramping up phase, and you also have a phase where the infrastructure will be generating, I guess, sustained income. So we actually have financing solutions that will talk to all of those different phases. So I don't think that's really an issue where innovative or innovation is concerned. I guess where we at Standard Bank have been focusing on where innovation is concerned, and just making sure that we bring projects to market that have less risk of actually not coming to fruition, is actually engaging at feasibility stage, engaging with the likes of Infrastructure SA, the Infrastructure Fund, the Water Partnership Office in the DBSA, to make sure that as we package these projects, they actually are financeable. There is requisite credit enhancement. If there are gaps, there are viability gaps, mechanisms that we are able to bring to bear to ensure that these projects actually are executed. So I think I'll actually stop there, because really that is where the issue is. The finance industry is well defined, very well structured. We've got deep capital, liquid capital markets in South Africa. Banks are able to fund projects that have been pre-packaged, I guess, risk mitigated to a certain extent. So that's not really where the challenge is, Sam.
Okay. Let's talk on the challenges in a minute. MEC, we've spoken quite a lot about collaboration today and this morning so far, and obviously as a facilitator of growth, as a facilitator of the network infrastructures that are required to ensure success. Let me ask you this, what do you see as new models that Gauteng and the Gauteng government is pursuing to attract investment, and not just attract investment, but also fast-track implementation and ultimately bring that project pipeline a lot closer to completion?
I think for us, the most important question is to indicate, issues to indicate that as a province, we are obviously, as a smart province, moving away from, conventional, traditional methods and models of funding. Let me quickly indicate that we do have an entity in the province that's called GIFA, the Gauteng Finance Infrastructure Agency, which is actually piloting and leading the province in introducing much more advanced, better methods of sourcing alternative sources of funding. And we're looking at making sure that we can source private capital to finance a whole range of portfolio of investment opportunities. Some of them MEC Maide has spoken to. So in general, we are exploring and, of course, seeking to partner with the private sector. There's already best practice of public-private partnerships. So in that instance, I think and let me also just add that we're also supporting municipalities because, accessing private sector funding and partnering with the private sector requires some, very important processes, proper project preparation and all that. So our entity is helping with that, and I think that's the direction we're taking, and that's what we're looking forward to.
We've spoken about the involvement of the private sector. We've spoken about the challenges to the fiscus. Needing to aggressively drive growth in gross fixed capital formation is going to require pace. It's going to require innovation. It's going to require forward thinking. And I think this is a great example to turn to Transnet, Yolisa. We know, and I think it would be wrong to sugarcoat the challenges we faced in ensuring that what we make, and Neil Hill from Ford mentioned it today, we are aware of the challenges in bringing goods to the rest of the world from a transport perspective. How have you been thinking about addressing these challenges? And then, perhaps to follow on this question, we've seen the Minister, Barbara Creecy, recently announce the request for information that many have cited as the potential to unlock new ways of thinking about growth in the rail industry, new ways of thinking about how we promote our network industries. What do you think about, firstly, the challenges that we sit with today? And these are well known, but maybe just for those who aren't familiar, ailing rail infrastructure and aged or dated locomotives. But how are we going to see this rapid expansion with things like the RFI that was announced just recently?
One of the things we've had to do is to really focus on our recovery in the past 18 months. And I think it's a known that our balance sheet is challenged. When we raise capital, we don't raise capital for expansion. We raise capital for our daily operations, which is an anomaly. But how we've managed to address that volume decline is basically partnering, not just with the private sector, but with our customers. So we've developed two kinds of frameworks or policies, if I may call it that for a lack of a better word. The first one, we have what we call a mutual cooperation agreement with our partners. I'll give you two examples. The coal line and our ore line, which are our rainmakers, are challenged in terms of their infrastructure, whether it's the ailing railway line or it is riddled with cable theft. We then did an assessment jointly with our customers. So we know what is broken on those lines. And it's a good start if you know what problem you're solving for. The second one is we know the cost of fixing those lines. So through that mutual cooperation agreement, we are now entering into a space where we talk about how do we jointly or collectively fix the line, right? Whilst we look at, or whilst we wait for the outcome of the RFI that the minister issued, which will tell us how to partner with the private sector moving forward. That's number one. The second one, we have what we call the joint investment external partner selection process. When I started at Transnet, interestingly enough, it's about 5 years ago, you would send me a proposal, it's unsolicited. The minute it's unsolicited, we wouldn't know what to do with it because we are confined to the prescripts of the PFMA.
Yeah.
So it usually found itself into folder number 1000. That joint investment partner selection process allows us to engage with you. Whether at the end of the day, it still turns out that we still need to go to market, but at least we would have given that proposal a fair chance of survival. So I think through these initiatives and through these collaborations, we've then unlocked the capabilities of fixing our lines, working with our customers. One of the, we found it very interesting is that we needed to procure batteries and compressors for the core line. Through that very same MCA, we did that procurement via our customers. Two things happened. It was cheaper and it was quicker. So the minute you procure as government, there's an understanding, an unfortunate fallacy that the pockets are deeper and therefore there's that 20-25% markup. So this is how it helps to work with the customers. Now coming back to the second question, we are operating in a very complex environment which is going through interesting rail reforms. You've mentioned the minister going out to the market. That is at the back of the National Rail Policy as well as the Freight and Logistics Master Plan. The Freight and Logistics Master Plan has got two to it. One is it's the migration of rail-friendly cargo from road to rail, and the second one is partnering with the private sector. So what the minister is basically to the market were requests for information on 3-4 of our strategic corridors, the ore line, the coal line, the container corridor, which originates here in Gauteng, to KZN. And what we will be getting out of that, hopefully, is an understanding of the market and the investors' appetite on partnering with us on those corridors. The one thing that she said that we shouldn't forget is that the ownership of those assets still lies with government, but how do we unlock the volumes through strategic partnerships? So we're hoping, and again, one of the mistakes we've made in the past, to Pakama's point, is that we kind of assume what the market wants and we kind of assume how it's going to react. This time around, we're going to the market is going to tell us what they have in mind, and from there we'll then build an RFP.
But let's move from the physical world into the digital world. Sandile, critical and critical to success and accelerated growth and the multiplier growth that we all want to see achieved is digital connectivity. It's what will bring down access in places like townships in Gauteng, in the province. It will lead to competitiveness globally, ultimately, and this is what is going to become far, far more important over the next 20 years, is how we position ourselves competitively. Talk to us about the role of digital connectivity and the role of data centers that your organization plays in ensuring or supporting economic growth. Let's call it that.
Yeah, thank you, Sam, and good morning to everyone. Sam, I think firstly it's important to note that we now live in the world of what I call is the data universe, where so much of our lives and so much of what we do revolves around data. And in fact, data has become so important that some people argue that it's only a matter of time until it features in companies' balance sheets.
Yeah.
So in this data-driven digital economy, it becomes fundamentally important to acknowledge that digital infrastructure, i.e. data centers, they become the backbone that enables a digital experience, a digital consumption of services, etc., as well as their role in providing reliable digital infrastructure that is quite essential for creating both inclusive and equitable society. Not only the digital infrastructure or data centers, but also the ICT sector as a whole is fundamentally an enabler to each and every sector in our economy. So I regard it as probably one of the most critical sectors within our economy. If you look at the contribution to our GDP, unfortunately, we don't measure it quite accurately. And I argue that from a GDP contribution point of view, this is the one sector that actually contributes far more than what we realize. Where you then compare it to other sectors that have been declining year on year, if I were to use the mining sector as an example, where about 5 decades ago, it used to contribute 50% of our GDP, whereas of last year, it was down to a single digit. So this is a sector that each and every industry should be looking to drive more innovation, to drive more competitiveness across the globe. But secondly, in terms of connectivity, digital connectivity, firstly, it knows no boundaries. It provides opportunities for businesses to enter new markets instantly. And it also opens up South Africa to the rest of the world and also gives opportunities to the rest of the world to enter the South African market, particularly Gauteng, to accelerate the pace at which we're executing our economic growth.
Investing in Gauteng is not just about financial returns. It is about investing in the future of our people, our communities, and our nation. It is about creating sustainable partnerships that drive economic development and social progress. I need to also add, ladies and gentlemen, that Gauteng plays a critical role in President Cyril Ramaphosa's ambitious target announced during the 2025 State of the Nation address to lift economic growth above 3% of GDP. I'm therefore confident that the province can achieve more than 3% economic growth, provided there is a clear planning and efficient resource management. Indeed, to create this virtuous cycle of investments, growth and jobs, we must lift economic growth. I believe that this conference offers a platform to set even more ambitious investment targets. The national government has committed to increasing investment in infrastructure and people while upgrading and maintaining the infrastructure we currently have at our disposal. We have committed to spend more than 940 billion rands on infrastructure over the next 3 years. This funding will support our roads and bridges, infrastructure rollout, build dams and waterways, modernize our ports and airports, and also power our economy generally. We are committed to public ownership of strategic infrastructure for public benefit, while attracting the private sector investments to enhance services and focus revenue on public service provision. Ladies and gentlemen, Gauteng is well positioned to overcome its current infrastructure deficits and create a future-ready urban landscape to meet the needs of its growing population. It is also crucial for the province to integrate its departmental coordination and avoid working in silos when addressing its infrastructure requirements. Gauteng's regional integration is therefore crucial in this regard, as it focuses on creating cohesive, sustainable, and economically including Gauteng City region, emphasizing collaboration between government, business, and civil society to address challenges and unlock the region's potential. We must work together to create sufficient, agile, and well-functioning infrastructure that supports industrial growth, promotes innovation, and attracts domestic and foreign investors. Physical infrastructure also needs to be sufficiently robust to withstand the impact of climate disasters, while also incorporating clean energy technologies and systems to adapt to an ever-changing climate environment. Above all, Gauteng needs to invest in maintenance of its infrastructure to ensure long-term functionality, safety, and economic viability. The Gauteng provincial government and the city of Johannesburg needs to invest more in infrastructure programs, particularly within the inner city. In August 2024, the National Council of Provinces of the 7th Parliament in Cape Town called for the government to collaborate with the South African Local Government Association, SALGA, to form a committee to conduct annual assessment of city cleanliness and give awards to the cleanest city. In February, SALGA NEC Lekgotla committed to what they call Clean City Campaign, to clean towns and cities. We want it to start here in Gauteng, especially here in Johannesburg. The goal is to set an example for other cities to follow suit, attracting more investors and creating jobs for local economies and communities, especially the youth. Such revitalization must begin with fixing potholes and general maintenance of the current infrastructure. Even in this conference, we must not shy away from this. It breaks all of our hearts to utilize roads that are not fixed or maintained over a long period of time, when municipalities have the resources at their disposal and an obligation to do exactly that. Ladies and gentlemen, to attract more investment, a province must enhance its ease of doing business. Through the Township Economic Development Act, the province is moving in the right direction. The Act is a component of the Gauteng provincial government's effort to formalize and create township enterprises to make them easier to manage and support a healthy township economy through infrastructure and finance. It encourages the township-based businesses to join the mainstream economy and occupy space in the Gauteng cities region's special economic zones. Further, the Department of Small Business Development and the Department of Cooperative Government and Traditional Affairs are collaborating to offer local municipalities guidelines to reduce red tape and support small businesses, thereby reducing regulatory burdens, creating an enabling business environment, and maximizing business opportunities. Ladies and gentlemen, we strongly encourage investors to capitalize on Gauteng's strategic location, which offers a competitive edge in the Southern African region for trade and investment. It is the gateway to the rest of South Africa and the African continent. As we gather here today, let us reaffirm our commitment to building a future where innovation thrives and where entrepreneurship flourishes. To put it simply, at the end of this conference, we need to be able to identify investment possibilities in areas like manufacturing and industrialization, ICT and the digital economy, infrastructure and transportation, green energy and sustainability, boosting small-medium enterprises, as well as ensuring that we attain inclusive economic development. I therefore encourage investors to explore Gauteng's numerous opportunities, collaborate, innovate, and invest in projects that will yield returns and positively impact on the lives of the people. Together, we can create a brighter future for Gauteng, one marked by growth, prosperity, and sustainability. We should continue to attract investment in our province and country to alleviate poverty, drive inclusive growth, and create jobs. I wish this inaugural Gauteng Investment Conference all the success in its deliberations and plans that will be adopted going forward.